What's up, guys? It's Damp. So I'm going to bring you the Bounty Hunter guide today. In my opinion, this is one of the best classes in the game for general dungeon crawling and selective boss fights. The Bounty Hunter performs extremely well in mark parties, as you would imagine, as they have abilities such as collect bounty that do additional damage to marked targets, which is why they can be pretty effective on certain boss fights where you can almost make it a DPS race rather than trying to go through some of the mechanics of particular bosses. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. It's a pretty straightforward hero, which is why I think it actually is pretty good. Where some of the other heroes can be kind of complex to learn, this one really isn't. So we'll kind of go through briefly an overview on the character and who it plays well with. So like we talked about earlier, it's going to play well with really any marked party, but outside of a marked party, you can see here with these four combat skills, which are, in my opinion, the best ones to use on them on him for general use. He shines in slot 2 and 3. That means he's going to pair well with a Hellion in the front, and he can actually perform pretty well with some of the leapfrog parties because he performs decently, or actually pretty strongly, in slot 3, and even in slot 4. You know, he's got come hither where he can pull, and he's got caltrops that he can utilize to debuff. So you know, it's not out of the question. That's just not his strong suit. So he can even perform pretty well in those types of parties. Where I'd shy away from using the Bounty Hunter really is just on certain boss fights that are mechanic intensive. So what I mean by that is certain boss fights where there's a lot of movement, where there's a lot of shuffling of the party, where you may not, like for example, if we look here, collect bounties only in slot 1 or 2. He cannot hit these back 2 rows, and this is where really he performs best. He can hit slot 3, but he cannot hit slot 4 unless he's going to mark for someone else or he's going to flashbang. So again, any of the marked characters he's going to have a pretty good synergy with, but he does have some weaknesses in that he's not able to hit the 4th row, but he pretty much makes up for that with his baseline damage is pretty strong, and his ability, when he does crit, it hits for a ton. So we'll kind of talk briefly through the combat skills. So pretty simple and straightforward. Collect bounty, which is his mark ability. We've kind of talked about that already. With a 7% crit mod is pretty good. He has his mark where he can mark all 4 rows, and the benefit to the mark is it will actually, will reduce the amount of prot that is on a particular enemy creature. So that's very strong. If you didn't know, you actually can look at, let's grab just the Hound Master, for example. So if you look at the Hound Master, let's see, his target whistle will take away prot. If we go to the Arbalest, there's take away dodge. So just FYI, different marks can do different things. If you're a beginner, you may not know that. If you're an advanced player, sorry, you know, that's 20 seconds of the video you could have skipped. But so anyways, we'll go back and we'll take a look at Pat. So as we go back on the Bounty Hunter and we look, obviously it has the mark ability. I'm not a fan of utilizing come hither or any pull abilities because in my opinion it's better to damage than it is to move something in position and then damage it, because you save an enemy turn. So we aren't going to utilize this on most of his combat skills. You're not going to use this unless you're planning on putting him really in a leapfrog party. You then have Uppercut, which does have stun and knockback, which can help you control the party, but in my opinion it's too situational to be generally effective. Flashbang's pretty strong. It shuffles the enemy party, and it also allows you to hit the 4th row for a stun, which can be important, especially if he gets shuffled into the 4th row. That's something that he can do in the 4th row that isn't necessarily detrimental to the team. Some heroes, for example, they don't have an ability from the 4th row, even with 4 combat skills, so they get back there and they might as well just pass their turn. So he does have that, and it gives him a little bit of utility if he gets pushed to the 4th row. But also, the shuffle's pretty good, and the base stun is pretty high. So Flashbang's definitely worthwhile to take. Then you have Finish Him, which performs well against stun characters. You can see there, the crit mod's not very high, but it does give you 60% damage versus a stun enemy. So where this can shine is if you have the Plague Doctor that does the double stun to rows 3 and 4. Typically, you're able to finish off a whoever's in slot 3 with Finish Him in round 1. It's because typically those mobs don't have a lot of HP, and most of them don't have prot, so you're able to pretty much take them out in one shot. So that's a combo you can use. Caltrops can be used pretty good on certain boss fights if there's somebody in slot 4, or if the boss tends to move around a lot to 3 and 4, but it's not his wheelhouse. It's really not what he should do. Also, I'm not a fan of debuffing. I'd rather just, deal a full amount of damage each individual turn than trying to debuff and slow something down and screw around with it. So with that wraps up the combat skills. As we look at quirks, this actually is really, really strong. This is pretty much God roll to have these quirks. So Deadly and Precise Striker are really the 2 best that you can get on him. The 3rd one you can use for a lot of different things. His base accuracy, if we look at it on Collect Bounty, is okay. I mean, it's not 105 isn't outstanding, but it's decent, and it's I would call it solid. I don't think there's any reason that you'd really need to buff accuracy, but that's something you could consider. Another one is I would just take, generally speaking, speed's very strong on him. So additional speed would be good. Really, that's about it. I mean, you're just looking really for these 2. Once you get those 2, anything else that based on your playstyle that fits, it's almost like icing on the cake. You can take anything additional and it will help. But once you have Deadly and Precise Striker, that's pretty good. So once you have those 2, or if you don't have those 2, what I'd say is focus on additional damage. Once you have at least Precise Striker, I would say at that point you want to consider additional crit. So to give you an example, this is why I have this particular layout. So the Surgical Gloves, +5 crit melee, +5 accuracy melee, the -20 move and -10 debuff. I mean, that's hardly anything. You guys know how much I love Surgical Gloves. I talk about them all the time. In my opinion, pound for pound, if you look at rarity, they're the best trinket in the game. So the other trinket is the Bounty Hunter specific, which is the Hunter's Talon, which gives you 3 crit, 3% crit, +10 accuracy, and he will take additional food, which really is no big deal. The one thing I will say with the Hunter's Talon, if you're taking additional food, keep in mind the Collector has a chance to spawn when your inventory is more than 65% full. So right in that range, when you get more than 60% full, is when you want to go, holy shit. So that's the only minus to this, is you have the possible chance to get the Collector, but he tends to spawn when you don't want to see him, but more likely than not, you won't run into him. But just as an FYI, that's another thing that can happen. These really are the best 2 trinkets. I'm not going to talk about a lot of the other ones, but what you're looking for is crit or crit melee. Additional damage would be great. Speed's pretty good. His dodge is average, so I don't think you'd want to stack dodge on him, because at champion levels, it's not enough to really make him dodge tanky, if you will. So with that, those are the 2 trinkets that are wheelhouse. Ancestor's Pen would be great here, which is additional crit. He will take additional stress with Ancestor's Pen, but his crit is so high it almost easily offsets it unless you run into some really bad RNG. Alright, so moving on. Let's look at camping skills. So as always, I take Encourage for the flexibility and the utility. We're going to skip Pep Talk. Not very good. We're going to skip Wound Care. You shouldn't be worried about healing because you're probably going to bring a healer on most runs. If you don't, you can always bring Wound Care. But the ones that are important are This Is How We Do It, which this I use particularly for boss fights. So +5 crit, again, I'm going to run it a few battles before the boss fight. Tracking, again, we aren't really going to talk about it. It's okay, but it's not worth the 2 points. If it was 1, I'd say it may be worth it. Plan Takedown, again, this shines on boss fights. It also does pretty well in the warrens in the weld with monsters that are a little bit bigger. So plus 25% damage versus size 2, plus 15 accuracy versus size 2. Again, it's really meant for boss fights. And then Scout Ahead is another one you can bring. Again, it's not his wheelhouse, but he is pretty good at disarming traps, and he's pretty good at scouting. I don't think he's bounty hunter level, but he's pretty solid. So with that, guys, that's pretty much everything about the bounty hunter. I think the bounty hunter is one of the best heroes in the game. He's one of the ones that I use most often to just run through dungeons. So with that, hopefully that helps you, and I'll see you in the next guide.